Saturday nights, and welcome to the Saturday night stream of the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel, where we're just about to play a little bit of Rapid while we get started, and we still have to decide who exactly is going to follow on from last night's finishing of the Xanderhole says that ex-Nazis, or really Nazis who just claim to be ex-Nazis, should be more welcome in left spaces than people who are uncomfortable having Nazis in left spaces. So we finally finished that extremely long debate, and it's time to come up with something else. But for the moment, I'm gonna play a little bit of Rapid. Just get this evening kicked off. Get started with the good old English, as usual. Symmetrical English. One of the most annoying responses to the English opening. That's just not just me saying it. It is a theoretically annoying way to respond to the English opening. I have that from like 3 different books on the English. All of them say that that's the one that sucks to play. But there are ways you can deal with it, and I always like to set up my Botvinnik structure here with the C4, D3, and E4. Eventually to put my knight up on D5, where it will become an absolute monster. But right now we're just going to castle. Okay, gonna push F4, take back with the knight. That way I can just trade one knight and get the other knight on D4. There we go. Interesting. Not entirely sure why that's a good idea, but okay. I guess we'll see if it's a good idea. I just can't for the life of me imagine how it would be. As that totally weakens the king side. Although at the moment it's not like there's a light squared bishop pointed at the king side, so it's not too much of a problem. But nonetheless. Okay, saw that coming. Okay, option A. I trade this dark squared bishop, which I really kind of don't want to do because it's on a very nice square. it will become a real monster of a bishop once this the center clears up there. Option B, I defend this hanging B3 pawn with the queen. Yeah, except that really sucks because then I get forked. But I can do this, and that covers everything more or less. And now I have the bishop pair and black doesn't. Okay. Okay, this is an interesting approach here. Alright, so what are we doing here exactly? Oh, not a whole lot going on the queen side, so I'm going to get this rook someplace where it can do a little bit more good, where the action is. Okay. That works for me. And GG. Today in Caleb Muppet is totally not a reactionary trying to get fast shit into left circles news. Yeah, I was made aware by Andromeda Echo of the following tweet from the Muppet himself. If you are opposed to abortion and gay marriage, I might vehemently disagree with you, but you are still my comrade. So yeah, I mean, basically, if people who suck are his comrade, which kind of fits, because, I mean, they have that in common, don't they? I'm gonna just play one more while we're... Oh, I get to play white again. Fun. J.W. Jenks Jr. Okay. Okay. Okay, that was a really daft move. Not actually sure what the hell I was thinking with that. But there we are. And at least I can content myself with potentially winning a rook if J.W. Jenks Jr. here does not... Oh, well, okay. Okay, if I'm not castling, I'm not castling. Okay. Okay. How do we stop this pawn promoting? Can we stop this pawn promoting? That I'm not sure about. Oh, under promoting. Neat. Yeah, the idea would have been... yeah, that would have been discovered mate, except it isn't discovered mate now, because... yeah, on the other hand, I lost the bloody... bishop as a result of that, but... Well, let's see. I've got a pass pawn as well. Oh, and a potential fork. Hell. Oh, well. That's that. GG. And let's see what we've got here. It's been a while since we paid a visit to the Muppet. Socialist patriotism in America, that sounds shit. Okay, cancel this webinar. Apparently nobody did. Muppet debates Foch. Foch tells us what the worst anti-racist strategy he's ever seen is. I mean, his own approach would be kind of hard to beat, admittedly. Oh, we can take this one off. We've already taken that wicket. Okay. I think we're gonna go with socialist patriotism in America. Have a nice little deep sewer dive. Okay, let me get that background volume back up there so that I don't have to renormalize this dickhead. Hearing him once is bad enough. Having to go through and renormalize all the stuff.
Workers and comrades.
Okay. Let's see, who's all here? Christopher Halali. Okay, none of these people I'm actually familiar with. Comrade Pella? What, the Windows guy? Michael. Just Michael. Don't know who that is either. And the Muppet. So let's get this started. Let's see who the fuck these people are.
I'm coming from you, from my humble home down here in rural North Carolina. And I couldn't be more happier to be anywhere else than with my friends and comrades here at the Center for Political Innovation. And boy, do we have a great show for you tonight. The theme of tonight's presentation is Socialist Patriotism in America. I know that's an interesting topic among the left, but we're going to get into it. As we always do, is custom. We're going to start with our anti-war pledge. Caleb, take it away.
Okay.
Sure. Well, when we were forming the Center for Political Innovation, we thought we would adopt the Pledge of Unity that was created by the World Democratic Youth Federation after the Second World War to be our unity pledge for the Center for Political Innovation. In 1947, in the aftermath of the Second World War, people from all over the world gathered.
This is a totally normal thing for a supposedly leftist organization to be doing.
In Czechoslovakia to form the World Democratic Youth Federation. And the pledge that they all pledged together is slightly adopted to be the pledge of the Center for Political Innovation. So if everyone could please raise your right hand, we will read the pledge. We pledge that we shall remember this unity forged at the end of the Second World War, not only today, not only this week, or this year, but always. Until we have built the world we have dreamed of and fought for. We pledge ourselves to build the unity of the people of the world, all races, all colors, all nationalities, all
Well, like,
beliefs.
yeah, but not like queers and trans people and shit. Before we just covered that. Yeah, he doesn't consider them sufficiently comrades enough to actually stand up for them. But people who think they can fuck off, he does consider comrades.
To eliminate all traces of fascism from the earth, to build a deep and
Well, all
sincere.
traces. About those people that you sucked up to in Moscow. That you had the remarkably poor judgment to actually preserve on video and publish on your YouTube channel? Like all traces of fascism, like your mate Dugan?
International friendship among the people of the world, to keep a just, lasting peace, to eliminate want, frustration, and enforced idleness. We have come to confirm the unity of all.
Okay, any pledge to eliminate frustration that is taken by Caleb Maupin is just that's just perjured in itself. That is sworn in vain because frustration is this guy's stock in trade. He is a singularly frustrating person. He's not going to end frustration.
All the people, to salute our comrades who have died, and to pledge that our words, our skillful hands, our keen brains, our bold enthusiasm shall never more be wasted in war.
Powerful stuff, comrade. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a beginning presentation to get it started off here. So, like I said again, tonight's show is socialist patriotism in America, and I figured I'd come back with my own story and the journey I've had, and it didn't, I didn't always come off as a flag waving patriot, and I'll get into that. I think when I was, when I was a real young kid, maybe kindergarten or what have you, I used to look up to, people in the military as disciplined and strong and doing something positive for our country and our community. And I wanted to join the military. I wanted to do something bigger than myself and do something for my family and my community. And that didn't last long. I started, by the time I was like 14, I started to see something ain't right. I looked at the way that working folks were treated.
I don't know who this guy is.
I looked at the way my dad,
I mean, the fact that he's in an organization run by Caleb Muppet does him no credit. But, I mean, apart from the really sort of canned enthusiasm at the beginning of this thing, I mean, this is a fairly wholesome origin story.
Made barely above minimum wage. And how, 8 of us in horrible living situations. And, and there's these dreams of rich folks on the televisions and the advertisements and what have you. And like, something's not adding up exactly to us all working together for the benefit of our communities. We got these big fours and we're the strongest and best country on earth. What is going on? And, my initial reaction to being duped, to being lied to for so many years was anger and hatred. I couldn't stand it. I looked around at the way our immigrant brothers and sisters are being treated.
I just want to see if we can find some background. A Marxist-Leninist flatbed truck driver raised and living in the South. Let's see. Dust James Anti-Imperialist America is his YouTube channel. Okay, Stalin's Foundations of Leninism with guest Caleb Muppet. Bonus video. Okay. Fairly bland Stalinist
I learned
stuff.
of the situation of our undocumented co-workers and classmates at the time, and the stories of their families about how they were forced by our economic system here, by policies like NAFTA, forced from their homelands through destitute poverty to cross the desert, and many who died in the desert. And then come here and then work. Even I looked at how my dad was treated, and I looked at how my neighbors were treated. And undocumented workers were treated even less and paid even less and had even less rights than us. And then I started analyzing and looking into these wars. I'm not sure what was exactly. Maybe my dad's kind of Quaker background, kind of peace outlook from a Christian point of view, that Jesus was a pacifist. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Great country singer, country folk singer, who was also a letter carrier, John Prime, wrote a song, your flag detail ain't going to get you into heaven anymore. Wars are they're already overcrowded from your dirty little wars. Jesus don't like killing, no matter what the reasons for. Kind of, and then the Dixie Chicks. You know, you talk about they was the first people to get canceled. This is 2003.
Oh, fuck up. Okay, the first people to get canceled. Okay, see the difference between the cancel culture bullshit that we're hearing about constantly and what happened to the Dixie Chicks, which some people watching this may not be old enough to remember. See, what happened with the Dixie Chicks is, I don't remember exactly when this was. This was probably during the first term of George W. Bush. Yeah, they in the midst of all the just massive atrocities of all sorts going on under his dispensation, that at a concert they said that they were ashamed to be from Texas because George W. Bush was from there, and the only thing to object to in that statement was that George W. Bush is from fucking Connecticut. He's a blow-in. There's nothing Texas about him. I mean, yeah, he's got an estate there, but yeah. Anyway, so Clear Channel, which based because of the deregulation of the airwaves, basically was able to obtain a huge share of the radio and television stations all over the country in the U.S. They basically banned the Dixie Chicks from their playlist, and they essentially couldn't get any gigs. They couldn't get any kind of air. They couldn't get any airtime on radio anywhere. So that's not the first example of somebody being canceled, because that's not what being canceled is. When you get canceled, you don't get taken off the airwaves. You get 5 fucking interviews with different major media outlets a day. You get more time on the airwaves. You weren't short on airtime to begin with, usually, if you're a victim of cancel culture. But you get even more afterwards because every fucking media outlet wants to talk to you. God, so this is bullshit. Because it's actually a really good example of the difference between somebody who actually experienced something that could be called censorship and these dickheads who crap on about cancel culture.
They didn't even sing a song. They didn't even get to sing an anti-war song before this was in the era of, vehement national chauvinism and preparation for war in 2003. And Dixie Chicks were the first people to get canceled. It was we talked about cancel culture. It was the right wing that started off with this cancel culture stuff. I think there's a beautiful song by the Dixie Chicks that's called I think the Traveling Soldier. Talk about a young girl that falls in love with a traveling soldier, and the soldier dies in Vietnam, and she's heartbroken, and she never loves again. And I heard that song recently, sung at karaoke at the county fair. And then you also had these horrible stuff like think about like what they did to twist us, the lies they did to convince decent working people to support these disgusting, horrible wars. I look at there's also horrible.
And one thing that doesn't get enough attention, it really ought to. You look at the polling from those days, with the huge, just completely uniform media propaganda blitz about the supposed threat that Iraq posed to our very existence. Only about half the population ever actually bought that shit. It was an unpopular war from the very start. Didn't mean a damn thing because nobody was... I mean, you had some anarchists who were trying to get some actual disruptive action going at the time, but it never really caught on. And what passed for an anti-war movement, I say this as somebody who was a part of it. This is self-criticism as much as anything. Because it didn't do shit. It was just, you go for a little walk, you have some speeches, and then you fuck off home. And the cops, the only thing they have to complain about is that you possibly bored some of them to death. You know, and you still hear people talking about those protests as a success because lots of people turned out, as opposed to them, I don't know, being a failure because they were supposed to stop the war and they fucking didn't. So yeah. It wasn't that these wars were so fucking popular. I mean, Iraq specifically, Afghanistan was a bit different. It was that nothing was being done about it, and there was no movement that was really encouraging any of the kind of disruptive stuff that could possibly have made a difference. I mean, that's not to say there wasn't any. Like, you had some groups that were helping, like, anti-war soldiers get out of the army and things like that. And there was good stuff in that regard. I think it was, at one point, it was about 60,000 soldiers were refusing to deploy to Iraq at one point. And you had some groups that were helping them out. But for the most part, there really wasn't anything going on. I mean, no sabotaging recruitment stations, nothing really. Very, very little.
War. National chauvinist country music like Toby Keith.
Oh, God.
Toby Keith, who went on to talk about, proud to be an American.
And who did a song called, was it Beer for My Horses, Whiskey for My Men, which is just a celebration of fucking lynching. And this got, mainstream radio play.
And put a boot in your ass because it's the American way. Some kind of male, chauvinist, very toxic, masculine bullshit, if you ask me. Basically saying...
that's going to make Caleb Muppet uncomfortable because I don't think he likes critiques of toxic masculinity. He doesn't seem to be the sort who would actually really get into that, especially given the kind of people he generally likes to hang out with. It'll be interesting to see what happens there.
And it's the American way to slaughter and mass murder Iraqi civilians. For what? For what? What good does it do us here? What good does it do working people? What good does it do oppressed people here in the United States? It doesn't.
It wasn't supposed to.
So I posted my fair share of burning American flags or what have you. And there's something I want to say about this as well. You know, I've kind of come around on this issue, and I'll talk about that later on. But I think it is of the utmost importance if we're going to push for a better patriotism, a socialist patriotism.
Which is fucking impossible in this context. You know, you can talk about that. You know, there's all sorts of problematic aspects that happen when it is oppressed and colonized people. But that's at least potentially got some really decent stuff that happens in the context of it. Also, some fucked up stuff because you just can't have nationalism without at least some fucked up things happening in it. But when you're talking about core imperialist states, poor colonial states like the U.S., like fucking England, like France, Germany, there is no such thing as socialist patriotism, because to try to find some sort of nationalism that exalts these imperialist colonial states that have engaged in all sorts of genocide, I mean, that's never going to be socialist, because it is by definition going to be scabbing on all the people who've been screwed over by that.
A patriotism that actually loves the various peoples and cultures within the United States and is fighting for a better future and a better world.
Why do we need that? Why don't we just have communism? I mean, we can have like fucking communism that loves everybody and all their cultures and all their people and stuff, and just kind of bypass the idea of trying to polish the American turd.
We have to have respect for the oppressed nations. That means if Afro-American people or Chicano people want nothing to do with U.S. patriotism, we are not going to force it on them. And that is the right of self-determination.
Yeah, except, I mean, that's okay. That's a very minimalist version of it, though. But because you really ought to consider why it might be that people who have historically and are currently getting screwed over sideways by the thing that is the United States, that why a lot of them get fucking hives at the idea of U.S. patriotism. Maybe consider that and consider whether it's a good thing. Like, I mean, it's like somebody saying, yeah, we could have like a new kind of German nationalist spirit, but a good version, a really nice version. And, you know, if people get uncomfortable with, say, Jews get uncomfortable with the idea of some, you know, new German nationalist spirit, then they don't have to partake in it. That's self-determination. It's like, no. There's a reason that people would get nervous around that, and it's because it's never, ever been the harbinger of anything good.
Before and after the revolution.
Wait, after the revolution, we're still going to have some kind of fucking American patriotism? What revolution is this? I mean, I guess we're not going to have communism then, because if we have communism, then we have no state, so what's the point?
So I'll get into my own experience. So, you know, I'm looking along these people, and I'm angry at them, and I'm mad at them. They're waving their U.S. flags. I'm like, you're supporting the war. You're supporting the oppression of our immigrant brothers and sisters.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what they're doing, and it's really remarkable how well that flag, the presence of that flag, correlates with the presence of assholes who want to support imperialist wars and oppress marginalized people.
Why do you have that? And maybe there is a lot of what is behind national chauvinism is racism.
Well, yes, especially when you have a state that was founded as a white nationalist colonial regime.
But what good is it for me to attack working class neighbors? To go to them and say, you're nothing, stop that, and attack them.
Well, who's saying you have to say you're nothing? though. I mean, pointing out that they're waving a flag of genocide and that this state that they're so proudly loyal to doesn't give a shit about them, and that that's not going to change until we get rid of the state. Yeah, I mean, I don't really see what the point. Okay, you would. I mean, telling you're nothing or whatever. I mean, well, they are nothing to the state that they're waving the flag of. The state doesn't give a shit about them, and I think they do need to hear that. But I mean, that's not how I would approach it. But I mean, I think they do need to hear that fucking critique. And if they're just outright fash at like fash demonstrations and things like that, waving that flag, which is where you see that flag at demonstrations mostly in the recent years, well, then you don't talk with them. You break up that shit. You send them packing.
To fight these culture wars. What good does that do us to keep us divided amongst ourselves?
To fight these what good does it do us to fight these culture wars? Well, I mean, considering the culture wars mostly deal with issues that are basic survival issues to marginalized people, to women, cis and trans, to queer people. Yeah, I mean, those culture wars are actually a life and death matter to a significant segment of the working class. So yeah, I would say if the working class is who you're trying to represent, then yeah, it does actually fighting against attacks on marginalized people, on trans people, on queer people, on women, on immigrants, refugees, etc. That is actually something we kind of need to be fucking doing. You can't just skip over that. What are you gonna end up with? A bunch of white assholes with a red flag?
Why this small group of banking cartels walk all the way to the bank with all the money and continue these wars and keep us divided. They want us to be divided.
A small group of banking cartels.
How do we actually build this country? How do we actually build a socialist future? How do we build power that can respect oppressed nations and end these wars and end the system of imperialism?
Notice that the oppressed nations, to use this terminology here, they're intrinsically outside of this socialist patriotism he's talking about. He's specifically talking about a revolution that they're on the outside of. I mean, that's not going to be a good revolution. A revolution that has them on the outside of it is going to be a shit revolution.
And the answer is we have to be city builders.
Oh, this is a reference to his Caleb Muppett's book, We Are City Builders. And it's all about, he has this whole sort of productivist nonsense, and it's all wonderfully vaguely anti-Semitic at times. And so, yeah.
And there is no better example than the socialist and revolutionary movements coming from the global south.
Most of which have absolutely nothing good to say about U.S. patriotism and would be very quick to point out that that's not a good thing, and they would have they'd have difficulty trying to convince anyone otherwise.
Venezuelans wanted their freedom and economic justice and to escape the boot of imperialism. They didn't go around their country saying, we hate Venezuela. It's run by the bourgeoisie. It's run by the periods. Fuck Venezuela, burn the Venezuelan flag. They did not do that.
Yeah, there's a big difference between a country that is under the boot of imperialism and the country that owns one of the main boots of imperialism. There's a huge fucking difference there, dude. Think about it a second and you might work it out.
They said, we love Venezuela. We love our country. They built a broad anti-neoliberal coalition, took power, and kicked out the imperialists.
Not entirely. They still haven't entirely managed that, because the trouble with the left in power is they're just not really good at the whole strategy thing. They get high on their own supply. They start to think that because they're in one of those top rooms, with the nice antique chairs and all that shit, that's where you get stuff done, and that you can just come up with these, grand statesmanly bargains with the ruling class, and that the ruling class will respect that. When the ruling class, they just want at your throat. That's all they want. They don't really give a shit about any kind of grand bargain. And the result is that Venezuela has been backsliding on the major achievements in the Chavez years in particular, because all Maduro seems to know how to do is try to reprivatize shit in hopes of appeasing the ruling class, and it doesn't fucking work. It's alienating the base, and it is screwing up any opportunity that they would have to actually really win that struggle. I mean, and that's not just Maduro, it's not just Venezuela. I mean, that was Allende's major strategic disaster in his 3 years. I mean, he was constantly trying to make some sort of statesmanly deal with the Christian Democrats, even as it was very clear that the Christian Democrats were actively trying to just overthrow him and had absolutely no interest in any kind of deal. I mean, this is the sort of thing that constantly happens. So, yeah.
Kicked out the banking class. Kicked out this same group.
Okay, with the banking class. Oh, how about what about the capitalist class? Why are they getting a free pass?
Of banking cartels hooked in with the oil companies that are oppressing the people in the global south and that are destroying our lives right here for working class brothers and sisters in the United States. So I think we can look to that. And recently was the the centennial for the Chinese Communist Party. And I encourage everyone to read the speech given by Xi Jinping. And, China suffered a century of humiliation.
Okay, so I thought you didn't like the billionaires and bankers and shit. They got a bunch of billionaires in their central committee. What kind of class struggle is this? Oh, well, it's a class struggle that Caleb Maupin can get with, so it isn't one.
The Opium Wars. The British forced drugs into the country to keep the country poor. Just like now, as they first did in the inner cities with Afro-American black and brown brothers and sisters, with the crack epidemic, ties to the CIA, to keep oppressed communities down, get them hooked on drugs, use the drug war to funnel them into the prison system, the new Jim Crow, the mass incarceration. What started in the late 70s and 80s has spread to rural America with the epidemic of the opioid crisis and methamphetamines have destroyed communities, just as the English did to the Chinese in the century of humiliation. And Comrade Xi Jinping told the people, we are a great people. We love our country. And look what we have done in the last few decades. We went through a century of humiliation and now are the second largest economy in the world.
And that's really great if you're rich in China. I mean, that's not to knock the fact that they are one of the few capitalist economies to really make a dent in poverty, particularly extreme poverty. But the distribution of those benefits is still pretty lopsided. I mean, the billionaires who actually run the CPC seem to be doing all right.
Fast trains, medical care, education. The amount of progress, the material progress that's seen by the Chinese people through socialism is enormous.
Yeah, well, when are they going to get to the socialism then?
And they are an example to the world. But how does that translate here in the belly of the beast, in the empire?
It doesn't.
I think we should take leadership from our comrades in the global south.
Okay. Does that okay, I'm not sure exactly. Take leadership from them as in accept their leadership, or wrest the leadership from them
And say, we love this country. We love our neighbors.
Wait, okay, this guy clearly has not spent any time with comrades in the global south, because if you say that shit, if you say that you love the U.S. In that kind of company, I'll tell you, you're gonna be pretty alone that evening, because people are gonna just look at you like, "What the fuck? How could the fuck could you love that monstrosity?" You know they're fucking murdering us over here. It's not the same thing. I mean, each one of these examples is someplace that's colonized and under the boot of imperialism in various ways, and he thinks that you could do that to the boot's owner.
We love our cultures. We love our communities. We are the international American proletariat.
What the international American proletariat?
And we are tired of being exploited. We are tired of being underpaid. And we are tired of these endless wars in our name. Thank you, comrades. We'll go on to our first speaker, Chris Halali. Introduce yourself, comrade.
Comrades, it's a dear pleasure to be with you all and to everybody viewing. My name is Christopher Halali. I'm a farmer here in Vermont. I'm a proud Iranian American and Greek American. I was the first communist to run for Congress since the mid-90s.
Yeah, I mean, so that's quite a grift right there. I mean, at this point, it is really hard to believe that anyone seriously thinks that that running as an opposition party in the U.S. electoral system, which is designed to have a de facto ban on opposition parties, it is basically impossible to run in any meaningful way, that is anything other than a fundraising grift. I can't see anyone seriously believing that there's any chance or any reason to attempt it.
Almost 30 years ago. So had the election last year and came in with 1%, which was huge, with communists on the ballot. And I'm a current graduate student at Dartmouth College. It's a pleasure to be here
30
at
years
CPI
ago wasn't quite as
and
clear.
To be part of this conversation, which I think is very important. When I went off to college in 2007, one of the things that was tough for me, as it is for so many people in the United States, was how to pay for my education. I was the first person to graduate from university in my family. And so part of that was figuring out, how am I going to pay for it? How am I going to pay for school? What am I going to do? And like so many other Americans, looking for different choices, and the gig economy was not really a big thing back then. It was the military. And so I decided, even though I had been anti-war, even though I had been protesting against the wars in Iraq and was very vocal and was following great people like George Galloway, who at that time was an MP for the Respect Party in Bethnal Green and Bow. And I was a high schooler following that very intently. And I signed up. I said, I have to pay for my education. I have to continue to build myself as a person. My parents, gotta continue to advance. We came to this country with nothing. So you have to build yourself. You have to be part of the community. You have to be educated. So I joined the military, and quickly I realized that the military as an institution, and of course, this is a difficult topic for many people on the left, and we're going to get into that. But the military is not homogenous. It's not like everybody in the military is waving the American flag and has the Trump sticker, for example, in the past 4 years, a hardcore right wing. No, in fact, it's a very diverse cross-section of the American society. And you have two distinct classes in the military. You have the enlisted and you have the officer.
I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. There seems to be some kind of presentation here.
And I'm here to present to you
with our keynote speaker, Comrade Michael. Please introduce yourself.
Okay.
Hello, Dust, and excellent presentation, Kayla. Just a moment as
hold a
I
second.
bring
Did I skip over Caleb Muppet's presentation? Hold on. Okay, I don't think so. It
up
doesn't look like
my
it.
presentation.
This is Michael.
Okay, can everyone see it? Excellent. So, my name is Michael, as Dust said. I'm a Ukrainian American, a lawyer, and a proud communist. And I'm here to present to you Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, and socialism in America. Now, you oftentimes hear the first two topics discussed, but not often at all with the third. So I intend to rectify that situation with this PowerPoint here. And I suppose we can just dive right in. We have the central controversy of Lincoln, if we could call it that. If you hear about Abraham Lincoln lately, most of the time it's couched in conversation about how throughout a substantial period of his life, he had taken the political position and expressed personal opinions that suggest that he was fighting to, quote unquote, preserve the Union as opposed to explicitly fighting against slavery and the slave system.
And yeah, he was fairly clear on
that he had said racist things about Black Americans.
Seriously racist things.
But yet, contemporaries of Lincoln who were communists and future communists spoke glowingly of him, endorsed him.
Does not speak glowingly of them.
Supported him politically. In fact, that picture there, that's of a 1939 rally of the Communist Party of the United States of America. And up there, that big side portrait next to portraits of Lenin and Stalin is Lincoln. So what's going on here? Well, the central controversy, as I pointed out, is really who Lincoln was personally versus his significance in American history. So how do these two things really relate? Well, let's dive right in. And the first person I'm going to look at when investigating this is W.B. Du Bois, an American communist, an eventual CPUSA member, who had written a 1922 essay by the name of Abraham Lincoln and the American Negro. And it covered the personal views of Lincoln and their evolution with the Civil War. And the thing is, what it did is it really wasn't focused.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's plenty of discussion of this stuff. And the question to me is, who gives a shit? Honestly. He's another fucking genocidal U.S. imperialist president. He actually presided over the largest mass hanging of indigenous people in U.S. history, at least that we know of. There's probably, for all we know, there could be some that just we don't have any records of because there's just so much of that shit in this country's history. But, yeah, so this is in the context of socialist patriotism. So the idea here is you have to, since U.S. patriotism is nothing without its great leader cult, founding fathers and Lincoln and whatever. This is an attempt to rehabilitate one of the potentially least rancid of the lot, which is not saying a whole lot.
Focused on vindicating Lincoln. Rather, its primary focus was his historical role. It attempted to draw a relation between the economic interests of northern businessmen, or the industrialists, and southern plantation owners, the planters. It showed how they were, as much as they were connected, they were also in conflict. And W.E.B. Du Bois made the point that it was unsustainable, and Lincoln was caught in this conflict, and ultimately it would explode in the Civil War.
Yeah, a basic materialist analysis of the Civil War and its causes.
And Lincoln, as this conflict intensified and progressed, his personal views would change alongside that. And to give you an idea, Du Bois begins his essay with this quote: "In most respects, Lincoln's attitude toward Negroes was that of other average white Americans. He did not really know them. He saw black folk from afar as comical, shiftless, and ugly. But Abraham Lincoln was a man of deep sympathy, and he had the rare courage to change his mind as he grew and learned. When as president, he came to know Negroes as men. He dared to treat them as such."
That's a really low standard to be exalting somebody, though.
So we see this personal change in Lincoln. What's going on here? What type of material, economic, social forces are behind this change?
Well, a big one was that it turned out the never mind the slavery thing, we're trying to preserve the Union attitude resulted in a strategy that was actually quite ineffective. And it turned out that enslaved people in the South were essential for a lot of Northern victories. They were providing intelligence. They were going to extreme lengths to find ways to clandestinely signal the Union troops, to actually send them messages, to act as scouts for them, basically, and they were just absolutely practically demanding the right to actually join officially in the war. And that was the turning point more than anything. That there was just the only way you were going to make this war, ensure a victory for the North was if you got the people who had the most deep and personal interest in defeating the Confederacy totally on board. That's what changed his
I'm going
mind.
to put a bookmark in Du Bois and go back to him in a little bit. But for now, we'll look at another prominent American communist, the ever-famous William Z. Foster, who in 1951 had published a work titled The Outline Political History of the Americas, and in it he has a small but very detailed section on the Civil War. And here is his insight on this. "The drastic assertion of Southern planter interests at the expense of those of all other sections of the population inflamed and aroused the anti-slavery forces throughout the country. It also brought about sharp class differences in the Democratic Party, which would eventually form its opposition in the form of the Republican Party, which, of course, would host Lincoln. So it seems like a big theme here is the development of this planter class, which came into conflict with the Northern industrialists and workers.
Okay, the way he's talking about this, it's like it's completely new to him. This is really fairly basic stuff.
And the slaves. So how did this exactly happen? Well, to understand this, you actually have to look back about 90 years prior to the Civil War, all the way back in the late 1700s. And what was happening at the time was a lot of people assumed that slavery, just because it was economically inefficient, because it was so labor intensive, that it would just die out naturally. But then something happened. The cotton gin was invented. So previously, when you had these huge estates filled with slaves, they would harvest the cotton, and then they'd have to pick out all of the seeds from the cotton by hand. Well, the cotton gin did it for you. So all of a sudden, there was this boom in the slave market, in the raw agricultural market, in the land market, and the slave estates were not only resuscitated, but they vastly expanded across the late 18th century and heading into the mid-19th. And what had happened is that industry also expanded heavily, particularly in the northern United States and England. Now, why? It's because they would take all of this raw cotton and using textile manufacturers, turn it into textiles, various fabrics and such. And so you see this interconnection between southern planter interests and the northern industrialists. However, there were several conflicts packed into here. One, there was a big drive for the southern planters to basically assert a monopoly over the economy. They actually ended up in conflict with the industrialists, and I said we will return to Du Bois in a bit. So here I'm going to read you a quote from him that expands on Lincoln's role in this conflict. Abraham Lincoln called upon the growing commercial power of the North and the desire of the white workers for free land without the competition of black labor to volunteer to subdue Southern secession. He found himself at a tremendous disadvantage because Southern leaders had had military training and Northern leaders had not so that it was nearly impossible to get generals for the Northern armies. Lincoln agreed to use Negroes as laborers, stevedores, and guards. He became ready to admit that without the work of Negroes as spies, laborers, and armed guards, the North could not win the war. As the fighting increased in intensity and the tremendous cost of its war and the human suffering began to mount, Lincoln easily was brought to concede that the emancipation of slaves was the only way to stop the fighting and to maintain the union of power, which was to be the United States.
This is such a fucking scattershot presentation. I mean, I'm actually surprised this guy's a lawyer, because the one thing lawyers tend to be really good at is organizing material, because they're trying to get people, decision makers, to read it, and they want to make it sure it flows in a way that says that their argument is the only possible reasonable conclusion or whatever. So, but this is so fucking scattershot. Okay, so we talk a little bit about Lincoln. Was he racist? Well, yeah, it turns out, yeah. He changes his mind. Why? And then we talk, and then instead of really sticking with that thought, we go to talk about the development of the rural and industrial economies in the early 19th century, late 18th century in the United States, and the role of the cotton gin in all of this, and the conflicts that engendered. And now suddenly we're back on a long-ass quote from W.B. Du Bois, who doesn't even apparently get a PowerPoint slide. I don't get that, because that's the point of having PowerPoint, and it is a long quote. It's like, come on, just pick a thread and pull on it.
So basically, the Southern planters were so aggressive, so vicious in maintaining this and expanding this slave regime, they ironically came into conflict with those that they were connected to, the Northern industrialists. And they also came into conflict with the workers and, of course, the slaves. We'll expand on this a bit more later, but for now, to give you an idea of exactly what the victory in the Civil War of the North meant for the South, we really see, and Foster writes about this, we really see an assertion of these industrial interests and the industrialization of the United States and expansion of industrial capital. So this is Foster writing in 1951, and he talks about the post-war transformation of the South. He says, the Morgan Associates controlled the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company, Virginia Bridge Company, Commonwealth and Southern Company, Southern Railroad, Universal Atlas Cement Company.
It's like this presentation's on shuffle. So, okay, we just moved away from why did Lincoln change his mind, and now we're talking about the fucking post-war?
Company, and a host of other big plants and concerns in the South. Of course, all this industrialization of the United States would be impossible if simply the Southern planters had their way. And now we're talking about this huge expansion of industrial capital, obviously with a huge expansion of industrial capital, you also have a big development of the industrial working class. So this type of conflict attracted several notable individuals in Europe. One we might recognize, Karl Marx and his International Workingmen's Association, otherwise known as the First International. And it was a gathering of various European revolutionaries. Some were socialists, some were nationalists, some were anarchists. And they wrote an address to Abraham Lincoln about the Civil War. And the letter echoes the conclusions of Du Bois and Foster. It emphasized the importance of defeating the Confederate gentry, and it declared solidarity between the working class of Europe and the struggle to defeat slavery.
And again, this does not really tell us anything about Lincoln's motivation. I thought we were talking about Lincoln and his motivation, and now, okay, for a while we were talking about the development of the rural and industrial economy in the late 18th, early 19th century in the U.S., and then for a while we just decided to jump over to the fucking post-war. Briefly talked about the fact that nobody was more enthusiastic about defeating the Confederate slave-holding assholes than the people who were enslaved by them, and that played some role in making Lincoln rethink his position on the whole thing. And now suddenly it's just the Karl Marx and the First International wrote a letter to Lincoln. Okay, so a lot of people wrote letters to him.
The United States. It saw a eventual defeat of slavery as a necessary stepping stone for historical progress and the eventual emancipation of all workers. Here's a quote from it to give you a better idea. While the working men allowed slavery to defile their own republic, while before the Negro mastered and sold without his concurrence, they boasted it the highest prerogative of the white-skinned laborer to sell himself and choose his own master. They were unable to attain the true freedom of labor or to support their European brethren in their struggle for emancipation, but this barrier to progress has been swept off by the Red Sea of civil war. So there was this continuity of history. So the Civil War was a stepping stone for the eventual emancipation of the whole working class.
Okay, I mean, yeah. Mostly we're just getting a bunch of quotes from people. We're not getting any real analysis, and it's all very just random.
And the freedom of the slaves was necessary for that. And the Civil War itself was the continuity of the first American Revolution, which was the 13 colonies breaking itself off from Britain. So it was, and the outcome of the Civil War and the path that America was being set upon was essential for the fate of the international working class.
Okay, amongst other things, because this is putting me to sleep, and I'm really beginning to regret this choice of video. I think I'm gonna switch back over to Rapid for the last 15 minutes. Jesus. Okay. I mean, I guess the idea of the Center for Political Insomniacs is to, to sedate the bourgeoisie to death? Center for Political Valium. Oh, blah. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna stick with that video next week. That sucked. I mean, it's like, yeah, I think there could be some ideas that I could kind of work off of that. I could build on some ideas there, but the level of boredom, I don't know if it's worth it. There's gotta be better stuff. I know I have better stuff in my reaction for a Vodder playlist. Oh, my favorite blunder. Hello. Yep, there we go. Now we're gonna see the Dark Square Bishop's about to hang. Oh, no, not this time. Okay, that's fine. Okay, gonna move up to d4. No, I'm not. Instead, I will go here and fork the queen and the bishop. Okay, I'm not gonna do the foolish thing and think that that's mate, right? Yeah, okay. That's fine. Oh, shit. Can't believe I just did that. Good game, GG. Time for at least one more after that little debacle. Get some pizza action going here. Okay. Gumnam, gumnam, saneshimoso. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with another video to react to the next time. Yeah, it just wasn't dynamic enough. I mean, there was some bullshit in there, but I mean, I'm sure there was plenty more, but God, I was just getting a little bit mind numbed by it. And I find putting one's audience to sleep. Well, actually, this is probably a good time slot to be putting one's audience to sleep in. It might actually be a popular, but that's not really what I'm going for, so I'm gonna try not to do that. Okay. 미도운 사람. And GG. Win some, lose some. 이어나가자. Антон Санников, 1993. Да, из России. Атакую я его по-английски. D5. Okay. What's our worry here? What's the threat? Что мне грозит? Ну, раз ушел, вернуться нельзя. Вот. А сейчас готовится новое приближение к полю D5. Хотела я открыть эту линию. Ну, хочешь это? Страдай. О, надо же открыть эту линию. Как же открыть? Если открываю... Мне иначе освободиться от этого атака нельзя. Ну, посмотрим. Что будет теперь? Повторение ходов? Нет, повторения ходов не будет. Ну. Эта позиция разосрана. Нет. Вопрос из армянского радио. Есть ли выход из безвыходной ситуации? Ответ. Вопросов о пандемической ситуации позже не ответится. Мне уже пора. Gear. And yes, so I will be seeing you tomorrow, not tomorrow, Friday night at 11:30, from 11:30 to 1 a.m. here on YouTube and Twitch. And if you enjoy this content, I always love to have support over my Patreon. That's patreon.com/Elise Hendrick. You can find that information on pretty much all my other videos on YouTube. And I look forward to seeing you